PowerBook 100. In 1989, Apple released the Macintosh Portable. It was battery-powered, it was capable, and it weighed 16 pounds. Nobody used it. 2 years later, Apple went back to zero. The PowerBook 100 launched on October 21, 1991, weighing 5.1 pounds. Designed and built by Sony using Apple's specifications, it introduced something that seems obvious now, but was genuinely new then. The keyboard was positioned toward the screen, leaving room for palm rests on either side of a front-mounted trackball. Every laptop built since 1991 uses this same basic layout. Before the PowerBook, keyboards were pushed to the front edge of laptops, with empty space behind them. Nobody had thought to move them. Apple moved them. The PowerBook line generated over $1 billion in revenue in its first year and captured 40% of all laptop sales. It was one of the most important industrial design decisions in the history of personal computing, and it came from a computer that barely anyone talks about anymore. iBook G3. In 1998, the iMac arrived and changed what a desktop computer was allowed to look like. A year later, Apple brought the same philosophy to laptops. The iBook G3 launched in July 1999 with a translucent polycarbonate shell, a built-in handle, and a design that looked like it had been drawn by someone who had never seen a beige box. It came in blueberry and tangerine at launch. It was built for students and consumers who found regular laptops intimidating or dull. Apple marketed it as iMac to go. The iBook G3 was also the first mainstream laptop to include built-in airport Wi-Fi as a standard option. In 1999, Wi-Fi on a laptop was not normal. The iBook made it feel like it should be. The clamshell design was discontinued in 2001, replaced by a more conventional white polycarbonate shape. But the design philosophy it carried lasted far longer. It proved that a computer could have a personality. PowerBook G4 Titanium. Before the PowerBook G4 Titanium, premium laptops were chunky, plasticky, and forgettable. Steve Jobs unveiled the TiBook at Macworld Expo on January 9, 2001. Its case was made from aerospace-grade titanium. Its display was 15.2 inches wide with thin bezels. It was just 1 inch thick, nearly half the thickness of the PowerBook G3 it replaced. The reaction in the room was immediate. For a professional laptop in 2001, 1 inch was almost shockingly thin. Jobs had spent much of the pre-launch period comparing Apple's laptops unfavorably to Sony's premium VIO line, which had what he called the sex. The TiBook was Apple's answer to that. It was the first Apple laptop with a widescreen display. It was the first to flip the Apple logo on the lid so it faced outward correctly when open. It introduced the sleek metallic rectangular form language that Apple laptops still use today, and that every other laptop manufacturer eventually copied. The titanium PowerBook was not without problems. Its hinges failed, its paint chipped, and its wireless reception was weakened by the metal body. But as a statement of intent, it was completely definitive. Every sleek aluminum laptop you see today owes something to this machine. MacBook Pro. For years, Apple had built its computers around PowerPC processors designed in partnership with IBM and Motorola. In June 2005, Steve Jobs announced Apple was switching to Intel. The audience at WWDC was stunned. 7 months later, Apple delivered. The first MacBook Pro launched in January 2006, replacing the PowerBook G4 line entirely. It ran on an Intel Core Duo processor and delivered up to 4 times the performance of the PowerBook G4 it replaced. It was the beginning of a 14-year Intel era for the Mac. The transition happened faster than almost anyone expected. Apple moved its entire Mac lineup to Intel within a year of the announcement. The MacBook Pro retained the aluminum design of the PowerBook G4 while adding a brighter display, MagSafe magnetic power connector, and a backlit keyboard. For professionals, this was the beginning of Macs becoming credible machines for running Windows natively alongside macOS. Boot Camp, which let users install Windows on Intel Macs, launched the same year. Apple had given its customers 2 computers in one. The Intel era lasted 14 years. Then Apple decided to do it all over again. MacBook Air. On January 15, 2008, Steve Jobs walked onto a stage at Macworld in San Francisco and said, "There's something in the air." He reached to the side, picked up a standard manila office envelope, and slid out a complete laptop. The MacBook Air measured 0.16 inches at its thinnest point and 0.76 inches at its thickest. It had no optical drive. It had no Ethernet port. It had a single USB port. The reaction from reviewers was split. Some were stunned by what Apple had achieved. Others were furious about what Apple had removed. One port. How could they ship a laptop with one port? Within 5 months, HP released the Voodoo Envy 133 to compete directly with it. By 2009, Dell had launched the Adamo. By 2012, Intel had formally created the Ultrabook category, a specification designed to match the MacBook Air's thinness across the Windows laptop market. The entire category of thin laptop that now dominates the market exists because of a manila envelope moment. The MacBook Air was not a perfect computer when it launched. It was something more useful. It was a statement that the optical drive was over, that thinness was a primary design goal, and that every other laptop maker needed to catch up. They spent 5 years doing exactly that. MacBook Pro Retina. Apple introduced the MacBook Pro with Retina display at WWDC in June 2012. The crowd applauded the moment they saw the screen. At 2,560 by 1,600 pixels on a 15-inch display, it packed so many pixels per inch that individual dots were effectively invisible at normal viewing distance. Text looked printed, photos looked analog. The difference from a standard laptop screen was immediately obvious to anyone in the room. Developer Marco Arment called it the best laptop ever made. The Retina MacBook Pro also dropped the optical drive and added an SSD as standard, decisions that looked radical at the time, and standard within 2 years. The display impact was industry-wide. Within 12 months, Google had released the Chromebook Pixel with a high-resolution display. Samsung, Toshiba, and Asus followed with their own high-density laptop screens. Apple had shown the industry what a laptop display was supposed to look like. The standard laptop screen of 1,366 by 768 pixels, which had dominated the market for a decade, was suddenly embarrassing. It took several years for the rest of the industry to catch up completely. MacBook. One port, maximum argument. In March 2015, Apple introduced the 12-inch MacBook, a redesigned consumer laptop so aggressively thin and light that it contained exactly one port. One USB-C port, for charging, for connecting peripherals, for everything, not a single other connection on the entire machine. It weighed 2 pounds. It had a fanless design, completely silent at all times. The reaction followed a familiar pattern. Critics called it underpowered and absurdly limited. Reviewers questioned whether a laptop with a single port was a usable professional tool. Adapters became mandatory. The $79 adapter Apple sold alongside it let you connect a USB-C cable, a standard USB cable, and HDMI simultaneously, converting one port into 3, at a price that felt calculated to mock the decision that made it necessary. USB-C had been an obscure connector standard before 2015. Apple's decision to build an entire laptop around it launched it into mainstream adoption faster than any specification body could have managed. Within 2 years, the MacBook's port configuration went from outrageous to prescient as USB-C became standard across the industry. The MacBook was discontinued in 2019, outliving many of its critics. It had done its job. It had moved the industry. MacBook Pro Touch Bar. The idea that didn't work. In October 2016, Apple announced a major redesign of the MacBook Pro. Thinner, lighter, new keyboard, and one signature new feature, the Touch Bar. Where function keys had sat for decades, Apple placed a narrow OLED touchscreen strip that changed dynamically based on the application being used. Apple called it revolutionary. Professional users called it something else. The physical escape key was gone, replaced by a soft touch target that moved and could be accidentally pressed. Programmers who relied on function keys for shortcuts found the touch bar slower and less reliable than physical keys. Musicians and video editors who had expected it to transform their workflow largely found it ignored it. The touch bar lasted from 2016 to 2023, 7 years, before Apple removed it entirely from the MacBook Pro lineup and quietly returned physical function keys. At the 2021 MacBook Pro launch, Apple said the new design brought back the familiar tactile feel of mechanical keys that Pro users love. It was the closest Apple has ever come to publicly describing the Touch Bar as a mistake without actually saying the word. MacBook Pro M1. In November 2020, Apple announced its first Mac with Apple Silicon. The MacBook Air, 13-inch MacBook Pro, and Mac Mini all launched with the M1 chip, designed entirely by Apple. The benchmark scores published in the first hours told a clear story. The M1 MacBook Air, with no fan and a $999 price tag, outperformed Apple's own 16-inch MacBook Pro with an Intel Core i9 in single-core performance. It outran machines that cost twice the price. It completed a 4K video export in Final Cut Pro in less than a third of the time of the Intel model it replaced. Battery life reached 17 to 20 hours in real-world use, numbers that had been marketing fantasy on Intel machines. The Mac had spent 14 years on Intel chips because Intel was the best option available. November 2020 was the day it became clear Intel was no longer the best option. PC manufacturers had no response at the same price point. The M1 chip delivered more performance per watt than anything in the Windows laptop market. An entry-level $999 laptop was now faster than flagship Intel machines that cost $2,500. The reviews were almost uniformly the same. This changes everything. The transition from Intel to Apple Silicon took 2 years. The performance gap between Apple Silicon and the competition took considerably longer to close. Some would argue it still hasn't been fully closed. MacBook Air M2. In June 2022, Apple redesigned the MacBook Air around the M2 chip. Flat top and bottom, no wedge taper, a new MagSafe charging port, a larger 13.6-inch display, and a redesigned camera notch at the top of the screen. The Air has never had a fan. The M2 version took that silence and paired it with performance that would have required active cooling from any other manufacturer. In multi-core benchmarks, the M2 MacBook Air matched or exceeded many gaming laptops that ran hot, loud, and heavy. It did this in a machine that was completely, permanently silent. No throttling under normal loads. No spinning fan at 3 a.m. while it compiled code. Apple claimed 18 hours of battery life. Real-world testing from reviewers confirmed 15 to 17 hours under mixed workloads. The M2 Air became the best-selling laptop in the world, according to Apple. For most users, the laptop that needs cooling the most turns out to be the one that doesn't need it at all. MacBook Pro M4, the most powerful laptop Apple has ever made. In October 2024, Apple launched the MacBook Pro with M4, M4 Pro, and M4 Max configurations. The M4 chip includes a neural processing unit capable of 38 trillion operations per second. This is not a marketing number. It is the hardware requirement for running Apple Intelligence, Apple's on-device AI system, locally on the machine without sending data to a server. The base M4 MacBook Pro delivers more CPU performance than the M1 Max from 2021, a chip that was, 3 years ago, the fastest Apple had ever shipped for laptops. In video production tests, the M4 Max renders footage at speeds that would have required a dedicated workstation with a discrete GPU in 2021. Battery life on the 16-inch M4 MacBook Pro reaches 24 hours, the longest Apple has ever claimed for a Mac. The 2019 Intel 16-inch MacBook Pro lasted 11 hours. In 5 years, Apple went from 11 to 24 hours of battery life while simultaneously doubling performance. The M4 MacBook Pro is not just the most powerful laptop Apple has ever made, it is one of the most powerful laptops any manufacturer has ever made. From a 5-pound Sony-built machine with a trackball in 1991 to an AI-accelerated powerhouse in 2024, the MacBook line has spent 33 years doing one thing: deciding what a laptop is supposed to be, then showing the rest of the industry how it's done. Not always getting it right, but almost never following someone else's lead. Apple made the same kind of leaps with the iPhone. Every iPhone generation explained is on screen right now.